Schwarger. I wanted to continue with Acts chapter 17 and 20 verses 23 to 24. It's the scripture of the Paul mentions the temple to the unknown God. And it says that Paul then stood up in the middle of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now that you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you." This is awesome. Paul's walking around Athens, and he realizes that there's a temple to an unknown God. So when all these Greek philosophers, they bring him in their discussion, and he's center stage. And remember, what they thought he was talking about, they thought it was blabber. And then he's center stage, and he's about to blow their minds. He's about to say, whoa, this guy's a lot more intelligent than we thought he was. He goes and he says, you know that temple you have? That temple to that unknown God? I'm going to tell you about the God that's temple's for. And that gives him a way in to talk about Jesus Christ. That is awesome. And in seminaries and Christian colleges, they teach that this is one way that you evangelize and do missions, and one way that you talk about Jesus Christ to others. One way that you preach is that the same sermon or the same message or the same way that you present Jesus to one group of people won't be the same as to another. Before, Paul was making the point to Jews, and he could just say, well, fulfilled prophecy. Well, naming fulfilled prophecy to Greeks, it wouldn't have done anything. That wouldn't have mattered to them. But what would have mattered to them? The temple of the unknown God. That's something that they saw every day, probably. Or, I don't know, that's something that was common in their village, that they saw probably often. The temple of the unknown God. That was something that they had. And Paul's saying, hey, something you have. Let me relate that to the God, to Yahweh. Friends, when we talk to people when we talk to someone and we try to relate to someone, we need to relate. And if we've been a Christian for 50 years, we can't come with that background of being a Christian in 50 years and think that someone is where we are if someone's not a believer. We need to start where they are. And then we can bring our experience of 50 years or how many years it is into it. But we first need to start where they are. Paul started with this temple of the unknown God. I love this verse because he's going to proclaim the good news of the gospel to them. But at first, the Greeks, they thought the word was babbler. I think of Columbo. Remember how Columbo in the TV series, people always underestimated him, and they didn't think he was very smart. But then he would put things together, and then when he weaved it all together, it showed that he was brilliant. Well, Paul, they're saying, oh, he's talking about some resurrected God. Oh, he's just babbling. But then when Paul's like center stage with all these philosophers, he blows their minds. He blows them away and he opens the door for Jesus Christ to be presented in a way they can understand. So thank you, friends. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.